Polypede works here. So there are a lot of lies told about Roger in the story of One Piece, right? One significant one that we learn kind of early on is that his name isn't Gold Roger, it's Gold D. Roger. So when we learn this information, it's very interesting that we learn it from the man himself through Whitebeard's recollection of a conversation that he had with Roger. But I think there's another very significant lie that is kind of hidden in the world of One Piece, that being Roger having a devil fruit. You see, in chapter 1047, we find out that Kaido seemingly says that the power above all powers in this world is Haki, and uses Roger as an example, saying that fruit powers alone can conquer the world. Well, this of course is a lie. Based on what we know about Kaido now, he can be seen as an unreliable narrator. Number one, he was not on Roger's crew. He was on the rival crew, the Rocks Pirates. Number two, Kaido is not an awakened Zoan. Therefore, he does not know the depths of where devil fruits can go, even though he knows the mechanics of what awakening is, as he tells us that as well, but he hasn't done it himself. Therefore, how would he know? Third of all, in terms of Haki, really, when you think about it, he himself doesn't really use the full breadth of what Haki can do, because never does he ever use armament Haki to defend himself, which is why Luffy's Gear 5th abilities kind of just bore through his natural defenses so easily. With that being said, there's another very intricate thing that makes me think that Roger did in fact have a devil fruit, because in the entirety of One Piece, I mean every crew, every organization, they have a symbol. The pirates have a Jolly Roger, the revolutionaries have a flag, and the Marines have a flag, as well as the world government, right? All these flags represents the organization in one way or another, or the leader of that organization. With pirates, and presumably the revolutionaries, I got a video on that, it represents the leader themselves most of the time. So most likely with the revolutionaries, the dragon flag represents something to do with dragon. Luffy's flag represents him wearing the straw hat and that being his treasure, so on and so forth. But on the topic of straw hats, so far we know that Roger is the oldest holder of that particular straw hat. But the interesting thing about this is that we have seen Roger twice in very young ages, one when he meets Rayleigh and another in which he's fighting the Rocks Pirates on God Valley. And in both of those times, his appearance does not reflect his Jolly Roger. His Jolly Roger is that of a skull with a very long, luxurious, seemingly blonde mustache. At least it's blonde in some depictions. So this has nothing to do with Roger at any point in history up until presumably his journey is almost over, because when we see him meeting Rayleigh, he is baby-faced. He looks like Luffy. When we see him fighting the Rocks Pirates on God Valley, he looks like a slightly older version of Luffy. He has scruffle. He does not have a mustache. But when we see him later on in his career, when he meets Odin, and once Rocks is presumably long since passed, he has a mustache. This is very different than, say, Edward Newgate, Whitebeard, because we know Whitebeard, once he becomes an adult and presumably is in his peak condition in his prime when he is a Rocks pirate, he has his iconic crescent moon shaped mustache. So his whole Jolly Roger makes sense because he's had a mustache from a very young age, right? But Roger seemingly only gets a mustache when he is well past his prime, on his last legs, or at least at the very start of his weird illness. So I say that to say that I think this hair growth was due to him eating a devil fruit, because it's weird in that the Jolly Roger doesn't represent anything about him, nor do we see the Jolly Roger in his early stages of his career when he still has the straw hat. We never see it. So what I think what's happening is that either he had the devil fruit for a long time and said devil fruit affects hair growth, and we so far have never had a devil fruit that affects hair. So what if Roger did in fact have a devil fruit, but he just didn't use it beyond affecting his own appearance? Because two, we know that just like there are some characters who focus only on their devil fruit power, there are other characters who focus only on haki or other skills, but still have a devil fruit. Those characters being like Kinemon or Kaido himself, because Kinemon has a devil fruit that really isn't useful for fighting in any particular way. The Garb fruit doesn't really facilitate anything to do with the two-sword style. Abilities just don't mesh well together. And with Kaido, it almost seems as if he's using his Zoan abilities as a means to an end to boost his haki proficiency. Even though he has a lot of abilities as a mythical Zoan, despite being on the seas for a very long time and having his fruit for a very long time, his investment is equivalent to that of early stage Chopper's investment. They're literally on the same level. And why do I say this? Because Kaido has his three forms, and then only when he is drunk, so only when he is under the influence of a stimulant of some sort, that he has alternative forms. So he has his alternative hybrid form and a skinnier version of his full dragon form. This is very similar to early form Chopper, in which he needed the rumble balls in order to access his other transformations, such as arm point and jump point and horn point, etc., etc. So he has as much devil fruit proficiency as pre-time skip rumble ball using Chopper. The only difference is that he just has more abilities because he's a mythical Zoan. So I say that all to say is that it is very likely, just based on us not seeing Roger's Jolly Roger at the start of his career or even in the middle of his career, we only see it at the end. This most likely means that he has had this sort of hair fruit for all that time, and he uses such a hair fruit to express himself and then expresses the sort of style of his entire organization. And the reason why I think it was that and not say like a Straw Hat Jolly Roger is because out of all this time, and Roger's crew being one of the most documented crews in the One Piece world, somebody would have picked up or called Luffy a copycat if he was using a very similar Jolly Roger to Goldie Roger, if the Straw Hat played any part in Roger's Jolly Roger. So most likely it didn't, and Roger was just using his ability in a way to represent himself and his organization, that being the skull with the long, luxurious mustache. And the reason why we don't see Roger use his ability is because, like I said, like with Kinemon or with Kaido, he just doesn't put that much stock in his ability. He just doesn't use it. He feels, perhaps, as a swordsman, that haki best suits his skill set as opposed to using his devil fruit. Another thing that's super interesting about this is that even though we have not seen a lot of Roger in the story thus far, we have never seen him in water. We have never seen him swim. So based on the fact that we have unreliable narrators and that only truth really comes out when Roger is either talking about himself or presumably when people who knew Roger talk about him, it's safe to say that any rumors around Roger are very fictitious and untrue. Much how, like with Luffy, people who don't know Luffy make up rumors about him. Like in Dressrosa, when the townspeople thought that Luffy was some sort of giant. So, with all that being said, Roger has a devil fruit, and I think that devil fruit is presumably some sort of hair fruit. Which means, yeah, Roger is a Bobo. This, I promise you, this was not a whole explanation to get to that joke. I am 100% serious, but give me your thoughts.